All right, good morning, everyone. This is the Joint Legislative Management Committee meeting on Friday, December 15th. We are here to continue our conversation about State House renovation projects, and we have with us Janet Miller. And how would you like to, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I would like Joe to join me because we're going to present in tandem.
I swear to God, you did this deliberately. You can get to one. Well, I want it to be worth your while, Jane.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Janet Miller, Sergeant at Arms, and I've asked Joe to be here so that we can do this together with the BGS group. And I'd like to just start by just hitting some highlights about this updated report. So Joe and his person, Sherilyn Laughley, who also works at BGS, who's in charge of the project, myself, and our legislative consultant, Tricia Harper. We've reviewed the report and we've all agreed for this to go forward. So I just would like to highlight a few things about the updated report that might help you just see the differences right now. I was hoping you would, because I was good. So in this report, the scenario options have been simplified to make the differences of the scenarios just easier to understand. Each of the diagrams kind of oval, bullet-shaped circle that would kind of tell you where different things would be. This still does not include a lot of detail, which this phase does not include that in this. And I think it's important that we just review the square footage again and just so we can see where we were, where we are. So before COVID-19, existing committee rooms approximated around 12 square feet per occupant. And after coming back in person full time, the metric was changed to 15 square feet. Now, to help with social distancing, a minimum of 20 square feet per occupant should be used to determine if existing rooms will work for committees. Most rooms will be in excess of 20 square feet per occupant after redesign based on accessibility design regulations. So just to take us back, during the pandemic, the Center Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, recommended 6-foot social distancing to prevent the spread of infectious respiratory disease. And as a result, if you recall, back in August of 2020, there was a report from Freeman called the State of Vermont Legislative Space and Health and Safety Assessment, and they regulated a 6-foot diameter separation zone around each person in the room, resulting in 30 square feet per person based on the committees and based on the pandemic. So Mike, if on the report, can you just turn to page 26, and then we're just gonna go through of the different scenarios quickly, and it's just a few highlights so that we'll be all on the same page again. So scenario 0, this scenario doesn't change anything right now, and I think Joe will talk about that a bit. Scenario 1, this scenario provides the new entry vestibule with accessible parking. The space will allow for health and security screening, a stretcher compliant elevator, a new egress side path from the east, a new bathroom, single-use bathroom, and a new fire stair, and a sprinkler system in the chambers, vestibule, and historic staircases. And I just defined that because that carries through to all the different scenarios. And if you look at your diagram, you'll see the circle. For instance, that's the new vestibule area. So it just gives you a sense of where that would be. And that little red circle is the fire staircase that would come from the Senate chamber. So it just gives you an idea of where those possibly would fit into the picture. So on scenario 2, everything that is in scenario 1, but this includes the 1-floor addition over the cafeteria. In this scenario, all 11 small committee rooms are on site, plus 1 additional, and 5 of the 13 large committee rooms will be on site. Meeting rooms 10 and 11 will remain as they are for meeting rooms. And the total budget for this scenario, oh, I should have told you, the first scenario, the total approximate budget for that is 11.6 million. So that's the vestibule area, the first phase. The second scenario will be approximately 27.8 million. Scenario 3, once again, everything that is in scenario 1. Now, this one includes a 2-story addition of the cafeteria. All 11 small committee rooms are on site, plus 2 additional rooms. And all 13 large committee rooms are on site, plus 1 additional room. And meeting rooms 10 and 11 stay as is. This is the most expensive of the projects, and it's the total budget approximately 38.1 million. Scenario 4, everything that's.
So all of this is additive, Janet?
Yeah.
The 28, the 30, whatever, and the 11 is all, every phase is, the cost you're giving is additive. Is that correct?
Each phase stands on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So each,
addition.
so each estimated cost is associated just with that phase.
That scenario, yes.
So if you added it all up, then 1 through 3, 4.
No, you do not. Each one has its own built-in estimate. So that 38.1 million is all in scenario 1 and that balance of the scenario.
It includes everything from the previous
Yes.
ones.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay, yes, it does. Yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Representative James.
I understand. I'm good. Yeah, go ahead.
So scenario, oh, sorry.
Got one more question here.
To build off Senator Kitchell's question, I think we were led to believe, first time we looked at this, that if we did scenario 1 now and then move to another scenario at a later date, we would not, they would be interlocking and we wouldn't lose any benefit of the money that we'd already spent. Is that still holding true?
For the record, Joe Ajak, Director for Design and Construction, Buildings and General Services. Possibly. Right now, this is the programming phase. So once we get in the schematic and then the design development, all of that will continue. Right now, the way that this is laid out, it's easily focused on scenario 1, which is now also part of phase 1. And I'll get into that later. But so we don't really know how that would impact it. But so if you're going to in the future be adding 1 or 2 floors above the cafeteria, something like that, the elevator, for instance, should be probably designed to take on additional floors, but you'd still have to build that up. So some of that stuff would still have to come into play. So the infrastructure could be there when we build that out, but we would still have to add on to that. But more of that will have to come later.
We'll be patient.
Okay?
I'll be patient.
That's how the sense where I'll be.
So scenario 4, have everything that is in scenario 1. Now this one has a 2.5-story addition to the west of the cafeteria. So in this example, all 11 small committee rooms are on site, plus 1 additional room, and all 13 large committee rooms are on site. Meetings rooms 10 and 11 stay the same. And this total budget approximately at 23.7 million. So that's the addition on that side over there. And that's all I had for that's basically a lot of the other updates. We're keeping things consistent throughout the report, and that's been done, so we're happy about that.
Great, go back to Representative Wood.
Janet, so after we started talking about all the scenarios, I lost track of, are these scenarios with what square footage? With the COVID era square footage or what we currently have, per person? Is it with the 30 square
It is
feet?
the 20 square feet.
It's the 20, okay.
Stated, yes.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify a couple things in my mind as well, which is just going to be unfortunately restating questions that Rep. Shaw and Rep. Wood already asked, so I apologize for that. I had also thought, so I want to make sure I understand, that there was a discrete cost for phase 1 or scenario 1, which was 11 million. And then in the future, we could choose to go on with scenario 2, 3, or 4 at an additional cost, but that we didn't have to make that decision right now. What I thought I heard you saying just a second ago was that it might not be that clear because the costs of phase 1 are built into 2, 3, and 4, and so we'd kind of have to pick now.
No.
Did I? Okay,
You do not have to pick now. What it is, the way this is laid out, well, if I get my presentation, I can do. Bring
Sure, go ahead.
that would help.
sure.
Okay.
And then I had a question about the square footage as well. I also thought, I admit I read this later last night, but I thought that everything was being designed to accommodate sort of a minimum number of folks at 30 square feet. But then under normal operations, which is the 20 square feet, we could just put more people in.
The question that we had back in October, that we presented was, do we design for 30 square feet or 20 square feet? And the answer that came back was the 20 square feet. So that is how it is all laid out, is at 20 square feet. Because of ADA accessibility considerations, some of that 20 square feet is actually going to grow. So when you look at this room here, works well that if you had somebody in a wheelchair, a walker, or the likes of that, could easily come into the room and sit down here and testify around the table. Some of the smaller committee rooms, it's really not possible because of the way the door swings into the room and the likes of that. So that has been taken into account that, well, that size room doesn't work. You really have to go up a little bit larger to accommodate that. But that is as great a detail as that we have. It's gross square footage that we're using and nothing more. It's really about the next phases of design, schematic design, design development, that will help work our way through that to decide which rooms will actually work and which ones we have to reconsider. Okay.
I thought I understood the response, but now I'm not sure. You said phase 4 was 23 million.
That was
Four.
scenario 4.
I mean, scenario.
23 million. That is correct.
Scenario 3 was 30.
8.1 million.
So the 23 is on top of the 38.
No, when you're looking at the scenarios, they're different
different sets.
instructions.
Yeah.
Style type. So scenario 1
Mhm.
is to enclose the courtyard and put a small addition on the west-hand side of the state house.
Mhm.
Stair tower, an elevator shaft. Scenario 2 is looking at adding a complete floor above the cafeteria. It also includes everything that we do in scenario 1.
Uh-huh.
Scenario 3 puts 2 floors above the cafeteria along with scenario 1.
Okay, all right, it's different variations on the.
Yes. There are different options, if you will, but we call them scenarios.
And I was like thinking of a sequential
No,
basis,
no, it isn't.
so, which now it's clear is not, okay. Oh.
Okay.
All right, we'll go with Representative Shaw and then Emmons, and then I do want to make sure that we get to your presentation.
But just want to really clear, if we chose scenario 1, 11.6, if we could build upon that as we move forward. So let's say scenario 4 is 23.7 million. That's the 2 blue circles and the staircase. So then we would only be talking about, if we did scenario 1, we'd only then technically be talking about the 50-foot long electric diagram. So would we deduct 11.6 million from the 23.7 for construction of that phase?
I'm looking at the report.
Okay, 47.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we deduct that amount, so that at that
The
amount,
11 is sort of the base,
Yeah,
everything
base.
that, on top, and which
Sorry.
variations.
I was looking at the wrong scenario,
oh,
just to make sure.
I'll just pick scenario 4 as just a number.
Right, understood. Now, they're all laid out the same. So no. Each one, so it would be cumulative. You would add scenario 1 to scenario 2, 3, or 4. So it is not built into that cost. So you do not deduct, you would be adding. Sorry, looking at this.
I'm not sure about that. I don't.
Looking at the scenarios, scenario 1 at
11.6.
6 million.
Yeah.
Scenario 2 is an additional 20. 27.8 million
On top of the 11.
on top of.
That was the question. Hang on.
Yeah.
I think,
It says it includes, I think that's.
It includes the work, but it does not include the cost that I'm looking at, the
So
breakout.
is another way to say it that it presumes that scenario one has already taken place.
Yes, I would say that is correct.
thank you, Representative. Representative Emmons, is that your question?
No, my question was on scenario 2, where it has the one floor above the cafeteria. Does that include moving the kitchen and seating area up there, or does it keep the kitchen in the cafeteria where it is now? And then just builds committee rooms on that floor above the cafeteria, or does it move the cafeteria up to that new floor and then convert where the cafeteria is now in the kitchen into committee rooms?
It makes the new addition above the cafeteria all committee rooms. The cafeteria stays where it is. The French Freeman had evaluated that and said that it's easier and less expensive to renovate that space than it would be to move it all up a flight.
Any other questions before we move on to the next presentation? Go ahead. Did you have? Okay, oh, here we go, great.
Yes, so, all right, next slide, Mike, please. We already sort of mentioned when we were here last in October, we put forth 3 questions. One was around square footage, whether or not any space was off limits for alterations and renovations, and then whether or not to evaluate the west entrance to move forward on. And so we did settled on feedback to us at using 20 square feet for the physical distancing model. And as I said earlier, it not only takes into account that 20 square feet per person, but also we're looking at accessibility at that. So it could be, it's not in that exact circle that everybody was looking at during COVID, because as you're sitting around the table now, your 20 square feet is, more rectangular than it is a circle. To have a complete circle would really spread people out, and you would need a lot more room. Again, we have to remember that the HVAC system is under renovating, and that'll take into account the people who can fit into that room and provide the proper airflow. So those 2 things are coming together at the same time, or will. We walked through with several people, BGS, the State Historic Preservation Officer, Janet's consultant, Tricia Harper, and did the sheets and looked at all of the State House and where we could consider to have renovations and not. And basically, we were looking at the 1859 structure, which we're in here today. Out front and off to our west is no renovations really taking place in those areas. The rest of it could have some type of renovations with it. And so that also is taken into consideration on all the scenarios. Then the evaluation of the west entrance. And as you know, scenario 1 really is the west entrance and how that whole thing works out. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we have 4 scenarios. There's really 5 if you take scenario 0 in the report that has changed. On the new report from the last report is we've had scenario 1A. We have removed 1A. 1A was to a minimal covering renovation to the entrance of the west. And the thought was that that was not worth looking at this point in time. And so we put in the do nothing scenario in that, during COVID, you could work from afar. It was not ideal for you and anybody else, but that was an option that is out there. So really scenario is you work with what you have today. And obviously there's no cost to that.
I have a quick question. One of the main drivers of this conversation is making sure that this building is ADA compliant and accessible to everyone. So I guess I'm just curious why we wouldn't want to address that. Like why would we have an option of doing nothing when we know that we have to make these adjustments for the public?
ADA is a standard and not a code. And the way some of those things come about with a code issue is that when it was installed, you don't have to update unless you're doing a renovation. And that renovation has to be at 50%. With a standard, that's not necessarily true. And it could come forth and somebody could say, well, that doesn't meet the standard, and you would be required to do that. And at what point do you stop that? So when we were looking at the 1A scenario, it was really addressing the west entrance and making that better by putting a canopy, a roof or something like that in that entrance because of the snow falling issue and the likes of that, and just doing the minimalist and also providing an area for Capitol Police to do some type of a staging in the event of another pandemic. And that's what we were looking at when we were looking at the using the ARPA funds. So that was why 1A came about. We were not looking at that point in time to really tackle any of the ADA, because I think once you start looking at ADA, you're going to want to evaluate the whole steakhouse and make it accessible. And we did do a walkthrough, and that is included in scenario 1. So if you were to go forward with construction, that would be it. If we were looking at, because we now know that the ramp does not meet the standards that goes from the 30s up to the cafeteria. And that could on its own could be tackled itself. Or you take the elevators to get around that, which is not a great thing to do when you have to look at if you were, in the 30s and you get to the cafeteria, if you come to the ramp to go down the elevator, across the way, outside, up the elevator, back to the cafeteria. It's doable. It's just not the right thing to do. But all those little things could be tackled. But that is why we still with taking out 1A with something small, we went to 0, knowing that you were looking at. So
Jennifer Fitch, BGS Commissioner. So we usually, as part of our normal planning process, always include a do nothing alternative just across the board. And that really allows us to justify why doing nothing is not the answer. So it's just a standard practice across the board. We always do that. And then in terms of Joe, I just wanted to clarify, when he said 50, he meant 50% of the value of the building that we're renovating. So anytime we're putting in 50% or more in terms of dollars into that building to do a renovation, then in theory, we're supposed to bring it up to codes and standards. When it comes to historic structures, that's not always the case for a variety of reasons, because you don't want to impact the historic character of a building. And so then that becomes a conversation with historic preservation. So there are times in a historic building, even when we put 50% in, that we may not bring every element of that building up to ADA compliance. But again, that's because of the historic nature of the building and what we're being required to do in terms of historic preservation.
Thank you. Could you clarify the ramp into the cafeteria? You said that is not ADA.
there was, I forget who, I don't know if they just showed up or if you're inviting them or whom, but there
So-
was a firm who evaluated it.
So in scenario 1, has that been corrected?
It would be included in that, yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
that's all I.
Along with evaluating throughout the building.
Go ahead.
So I'm back on the accessibility issues, and I know that there, what you were just describing, Commissioner, in terms of the we have some capacity to not make a building fully accessible with regard to historic structures and things like that. Still, I think it's our duty to make the building as accessible as possible within the constraints of the historic structure. And so what I'm hearing you say is that the 1A option essentially if we're going to do that, we might as well do 1. I mean, I get that's what I'm inferring from what you're saying, that there would have been so much disruption to the building in 1A without the added benefit of some of the committee structures that are in 1. To me, it doesn't make sense to just kind of like only do the accessibility, because it's not really going to get at what we're aiming to do in terms of really making the committee process more accessible, making other parts of the building more accessible, which you do in 1. I guess less of a question than more of a statement. I feel like we do need to make this building more accessible to the public. I'm quite concerned frankly about the loading dock area being the accessible entrance, the way it's being used now. And it really is woefully inadequate. So I'm just putting that out there.
Next slide. So as Janet mentioned earlier, under phase, you asked us also and are presented to us the long-term, short-term phases. So what we have under that is phase one is basically scenario one. And long-term phase two could be one of scenarios 2, 3, or 4, or combination thereof. It's all how you get there. So in scenario one, what we're looking at is the new entry at the northwest corner of the inflow lobby, that west entrance. The egress stairs and elevator. So that's an addition that goes on to the west entrance. New restrooms somewhere in that northwest corner. New egress stairs at the northeast corner of the Senate chamber, which is right out this window here to my right. Egress site path coming out from the backside of the cafeteria. And also looking at accessible parking near the west entrance, because right now the ADA parking for public is out on Baldwin Street. And basically once you get out of the vehicle, the slope on there does not meet the 1 in 20. So don't know what we would be doing, but that is being addressed. And then in phase two, like I said, we'd be evaluating that as to further discussion. What we're going to do with phase two.
That's a good question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you describe for me what you mean by infill lobby? I don't know what
The
that
infill of the lobby
is.
is
The lobby out at the west and the
the courtyard in between the two buildings that you have.
Oh, okay.
Out here. Right, so out here from the arch to the last stairway that takes you up to the mezzanine level when you come.
Oh, okay, on that, okay, all right, thank you.
Infilling that.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please.
Representative Emmons, do you have a question?
Yes, I just want clarity in phase one, we're doing ADA accessibility in terms of entrance into the building, the lobby, dealing with egress from the Senate chambers for fire or emergency, new restrooms in that northwest corner. What about committee rooms? Is there anything for committee rooms? Because when I read the report, it's confusing. It's not clear.
At this point in time, we are not looking at the committee rooms. And so where we're at is we're in a programming phase right now. And what we're presenting.
I think programming, Joe, is important to say. The program is what we need to operate as a legislative branch, correct?
Correct. So with that, we're looking at 20 square feet. We have not gone in depth to evaluate every single room to do the furniture layout, what complies, what does not comply. So when we get into schematic design, we will know more and be able to bring that back to you as to where we are. This is high level. That says this is what we should be doing and evaluating. So as we go through the design phases, that'll get narrowed down, things are going to change. Unfortunately, I would tell you that the estimate is going to change once we know more. So some areas go up, some areas go down. But right now, this is our best guess and estimate as to what we presented. And so all that is going to come out into the next phase. Design, because we get more detail, you get more granular into it to actually look at laying out a committee room. How does this work? So there could be, if we keep with the traditional style that we have here today, and that room doesn't work. It's not to say that another layout is going to work because the rooms are the size of the rooms that they are. But that would be something that we would evaluate and go, well, if you just made these minor changes in these committee rooms, well, then they work. it may not work for you as a committee, but those are the things that we will get into.
So we're in the planning phase. It's just a requirements gathering phase. We actually start to take those requirements and put them on paper in schematic design. So we can't answer some of those questions today because we haven't gotten to the pen putting it to paper. But we will do that when we move into schematic design. And we'll have more detailed information about the impact of that 20 square foot when we get into schematic design. And that's the next phase.
Next slide. So into approving of phase one, we, as was just brought up, we move into schematic design. And when we do that, we have to look at the other scenarios, whether it impacts it or not, because we would hate to design something and then even build something that would impact us in the future phases. However, until you give us information as to more of what phase one is, we don't necessarily know what phase 2, 3, or 4 would be. And parts of that is going into schematic design to start working that out, to know exactly what is in there and how to lay that out. So everything has its way when you go through the design phases to get you to the end product. We have presented programming, and there's nothing that says we can't take into account 1 room, 5 rooms, all the rooms right now in ADA, and take that into schematic design and start evaluating at that point in time.
Yes.
This is a planning, high-level overview of the things we ought to do, and we can add and subtract things as we go through the design phase. So keep that in mind when we go through that.
Go ahead.
So I'm coming down to money. This obviously would come in the capital bill. Is that how this would work? And our capital bill is getting skinnier all the time. So the extent to which we chunk this out in terms of what it looks like relative to the demands on what is that recommended level of bonding. I'm just thinking about what's being proposed here, the 11 million, then anything that we do subsequent to that, how that would look relative to the capacity of the capital bill. And I'm sure that the institution's chairs are thinking about that in terms of I would assume that the capital bill as it's being proposed by the administration does not include any of this work.
I don't know because we don't put the capital bill together anymore at BGS. It's AOA.
AOA, okay. Yeah, we know.
We don't know, but we can inquire and get back to you. So I think just to recap, our role is JLMC with the chairs of the institutions committee to keep this conversation going so that we don't, because there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And so as this group has been saying, phase 1 seems to make sense and for this first phase, and then we need to have more conversation and public engagement about what the other scenarios look like for the long term. And so at our last meeting, we asked for a little bit more information to get a sense of what those other scenarios look like so that we could then move into that public engagement process and then turn it back over to the committees during session. So.
Wonderful. Next slide. It's like you're looking at the slides before I present them. Approval of programs. So what we have, that document, we have given to you. We're looking for approval of this program. We are not sure whether it is at this level, the JLMC, or whether or not goes before the full legislature or HCI, SI, and all of that. So we do need that understanding from you of what that next step is and who does that approval. So because with that approval, then we move into schematic design. And with that schematic design, to help out, we're somewhat a little bit way too early to be banking dollars for an addition that we don't know what it is yet, but there is enough funding right now to continue with the design. So we do have that already in the ARPA funds. The capital bill provided $200,000 also. fiscal year. So there are those funds in there. We have enough to continue with the design. And then with the approval of the program, it is also the public engagement process and bringing in the Vermont Historic Preservation Officer, the Capital Conflicts Commission, and the general public to present what we have today and just take feedback. And that's what we're looking for. And so looking for this direction on our next steps on where do we go from here.
All right, I'll look for questions and then we can revisit the process. So, Senator Kitchen.
All right, so approval of the program means just, we don't, obviously, I'm not sure what the program is, I guess is what I'm struggling with. Is it approval to move forward with scenario one that deals, which I think there's been consent to deal with the safety, the ADA, accessibility. So is that what you mean by approval of the program?
The program is presented to you in that the handout.
Yeah.
But yes, that is, if you say yes,
All right.
go through with any caveats you want to put in there, or just say, go with one, scenario one.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
So then my next thing is, then you said there's money there that could help support the additional work that needs to be done. Could you give, I don't have a good sense of the timeline in terms of that work. At what point and what needs to be completed before we say we're actually going to put a shovel in the ground on this? Can you just sort of give some sense of what that?
Anytime I give an estimate out like that, I'm wrong.
Oh,
Only because there's so many unknowns,
it's on.
but
Okay.
in the proposal, the scenarios have been laid out with a timeline by duration, because we don't have a go date. So if you look at scenario one, it is looking at construction.
32, it's on page 32.
So we're looking at the next phase of schematic design would be 3.5 months. Design development would be 6 months. Construction documents, another 5 months. And then we would start bidding negotiation 2 months, so
it's
9,
6, 11,
12.
12. So we're talking about at least a year out.
Yes, absolutely.
And I want to be very clear, they're breaking it down into chunks because, just like we've been testifying here, in order to go from one phase, or let me be careful about this, in order to go from one phase of design, I don't want to talk about scenarios because then we get confused. We need approval. So there's hold points, and anytime there's a hold point, right, that's going to add to the timeline. So there's a reason why it says non-consecutive in that table, because we're going to keep checking in, right, at the end of every design phase. And then we're going to need approval, and we're also going to need to make sure we have sufficient funding. Because if we don't have sufficient funding, we also can't move forward. So those are sort of two critical elements to the timeline. I just want to be really clear on that.
But we have sufficient funding for schematic design and design development?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, you do.
Representative Wood? Saw the question on my face. I think I'll just wait until you talk about the process.
Okay, Representative Emmett, go ahead.
I want to build off of what Senator Kitchell asked. So how much money do we have to put towards this right now with the ARPA funds and the 200,000 from the capital bill that we put in this past session?
The total funding, capital bill was 1.5. Sorry, ARPA funds was 1.5, capital bill was 200,000. So you got 1.7.
But you've spent some money to date.
And we have encumbered almost $900,000 for design. And that takes us into construction documents.
Okay, what
That
takes
was-
us, what takes us into construction document? Is it the remaining 1.6 million? How far
In
does
that-
that get us?
We had, I believe the contract for French Freeman was under $900,000. So all of that takes you into construction documents and completion of that. So that money of the ARPA funds has been encumbered right now. The only catch to that is the ARPA funds have to be spent by the end of 26. December 31st, 2026. That's all. So those funds are there right now. And math wise, I'm not going to do true math, but the design works in that timeframe. For everything
So-
holds.
So the money we have in hand right now gets us to bidding.
That is correct.
Okay, so then going forward once the bids are out, going forward in terms of actually paying for the actual construction is going to be new dollars that need to come in from somewhere.
That is correct.
Okay. So that would be a scenario for construction dollars would not occur. Would you need them this coming session or in the session of 25?
I think I roughly did the math of 15, 16 months for design, and what's not taken into account there, you know, how we have to present this and then do a review process. So you're roughly 2 years out, let's say, rough math, that you would need that. So that's about
So
2
in
years out.
reality, it's the session of 2025 that would have to put the money up for construction.
Mhm.
Unless you want to appropriate it in more than 1 year,
Correct.
smaller chunks.
But you gotta do your capital bill at this point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, but I think it goes over the bienniums. I mean, if we do some this year and then some next year.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so where we are, do you have anything else to present before I?
No, I'm done with my presentation.
Just want to double check. All right, so it has been our conversation over the past couple of months that phase one seems to make sense to keep moving while we have the public discussion and engagement on the other scenarios to bring back to the relevant committees on this topic. So I'm just going to say this and look for reaction. So as a committee, we are still on the same page to move forward with this and start an engagement process. And we can talk about a timeline around engagement process after. But are we still all on the same page with moving forward, looking around?
With phase one.
With phase one?
Mhm.
Still consensus? Okay, thank you.
So we've checked that.
That box has been, yes. Again, so next step is the public engagement process. And what I would love to hear feedback from the both of you is just what would be, like, I envision, having a form for people to fill out, which our office can take care of with questions for the public that we could have stationed around the building with the QR code or have it on our website. We could do this for maybe I would think maybe a month to 4 to 6 weeks. Is there any, and then we would give what we learned to the committees. Is there any feedback on the timeline, thoughts on timeline? And that would be helpful for you.
I did not have thoughts on timeline. I don't know if you did it. It's really about how to get it out there. Is it just that you expressed, or is there some type of a video or something like that? I know yesterday Janet and I were talking about doing a video, and I'm like,
Yes.
if I'm doing a video,
Yeah,
I can do it live.
yeah.
And then you have that video out there, an overall presentation. We can do that live, and then people can provide their feedback and do that.
I have one question. Would the feedback be on all the remaining scenarios, 2, 3, and 4? And what?
Yeah.
That's what we're having the program.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of, but I've learned not to assume much.
That's fair. Jennifer,
So the only other helpful tool that we found, and we've started doing this with land acquisition RFPs because it really spreads the word. And so it depends on how broad you want to be. But Front Porch Forum, believe it or not, is a great way to communicate because it gets out to so many people. And actually, in terms of land acquisition, we get a whole lot more responses when we're looking for land. So I just throw that out as another avenue to at least get the word out if you're seeking public. Because a lot of times, right, people don't necessarily know exactly, right? So, you want to kind of spread it out if you really want to get that public engagement.
And it seems like it stays for just a little while and then it kind of fizzles out, some of the subjects on Front Porch Forum. So right off, you might get a lot of engagement and then you won't get much, but it was out there and able for people to weigh in on it. We could have if people don't want to, some people don't want to put their name on it, it's in front porch forum. So we could have a scenario where we had a box, drop your comments off. If somebody
Yeah,
wanted
form,
to
we
do
can
that.
develop a form if
Yeah.
you'd like that.
Great. Representative Shaw and then Representative Emmons.
I need a little help, Joe. Is there an elevational view yet of scenario one?
There is not, because we really don't have an idea what it's going to look like until we start the schematic design. And even schematic design may not have an elevation so that you have an idea of what it's going to look like. It all depends how things work out.
So I guess at least my question is, will visibility, will there be any noticeable visibility changes in scenario one, in your opinion, different than what we see on the cover of this?
If you're standing right there, no. If you're going west, maybe standing on Aiken Avenue at a certain point, yes, you will see that
From the
that
face,
addition.
from the face of,
Dead center in front of the flower beds, that is correct, you won't see it. So there is a point in time that you're going to see that addition. It's just a matter of.
for this phase, I think that's really important.
In the next phase, I think, I mean, we can certainly draw a box and go, that's it. And for that evaluation, to go, where exactly do you see that and how much do you see? And that's a SketchUp thing that.
Thank you.
done.
Representative Emmons.
So I'm trying to track the public engagement with when we do the schematic design. Are folks going to be able to see that schematic design to weigh in on it? Or what is going to be their base, the public, that they're responding to? I'm just trying to track when we're
Yes,
doing that
sort of what you
schematic
were asking.
design. And because if you're looking at ADA accessibility in the building, people are going to be talking about access to committee rooms. And scenario one does not take care of the committee rooms.
Because we, if I may, we don't know enough details about that yet until we actually can show you exactly which rooms do meet that 20 square feet with accessibility and which do not. And you could look at it and go, not every single room needs to be fully accessible. There's accommodations. So what do you do with that? And it depends on what that avenue of accessibility is to be looking at. So that is maybe at the end of schematic design. It may not be into design development that I'll know every single room in the layout and how that completely works. So it'll be the process going through completely. But right now, I do not know exactly how many rooms are impacted.
And based on that, and then the feedback that we get from the public would then lead us into scenario 2, 3, or 4. Correct?
Correct.
It
Yeah.
would not be part of scenario 1.
Right. Got it. Senator Brock, sorry.
In terms of public engagement and what you show the public, it would seem that this isn't a single event of public engagement. There isn't a single presentation, because this is obviously going to change as you move along in what you do in terms of what it's going to look like and how many square feet are impacted and a variety of things throughout the project. Do you envision perhaps doing in effect more than one piece of public engagement? Do you view doing it in a way that is obviously much more visible rather than narrative, so that people see in some way, shape, or form, graphically or otherwise, what this is going to look like? And constantly asking, or not just asking, but advising people of what it is that's proposed to be done. What is it going to look like when it's done? And somewhere along the line, I think there's a significant audience who wants to know, well, how much is it going to cost? And are you envisioning, in effect, a plan or program that does that and keeps the public alert and aware of where this is going and how it's evolving?
So can I jump in? So typically speaking, on a normal BGS project, we don't do public engagement. This is being asked for and requested by the legislature. We support it. We think it's great. We're happy to join you on that journey. And we agree this is the people's house, right? And I think that's why it's really important in this particular case to have public engagement. But like the point I'm trying to make is you guys are in the driver's seat. So if you want to do public engagement over time at different phases of the project, happy to do that. So you just have to let us know what you want us to do as your project manager, and we'll follow your lead.
Yep, and so what I'll say to the committee is what it will do is I'll pull together a draft of what it looks like, send it out to you all just for feedback, and we'll continue to work on getting it set up and running for when we come back in the session. And so you'll have an opportunity to weigh in.
I think there were conversations throughout the way. It's good to just let people start with this, to just kind of like not be shocked at anything, just like this is just the bare bones. And just kind of like, if somebody sees the fire stair from in the back, whereas, who's ever looking at it may, just want to make their comment, I'm not happy about this. And it just kind of gives us a gauge as to what people are thinking too, right off the bat.
Well, I think one of the things to think about as you're designing how you communicate is whether your communication piece is simply a communication piece or whether it's intended to be a selling piece, which might have more controversial so doing.
It's tricky because we've all been dealing with this for a long time, and it's still difficult to explain and to understand and for someone that's not familiar with construction documents at all and how this works. It's complicated.
Yeah. I think it's great, just a great opportunity to hear people who come and visit the building, what feedback they have and experiences they have. And I know in projects that were, proposed years and years ago, about making the building look balanced, and there was lots of surprise feedback that people didn't like that look and wanted something different. And so I just think because it is an investment, it's great to get the feedback from the community. And so, like I said, we'll put together a draft plan for engagement. We'll send it out, and would love your feedback to make sure that it's what we're all envisioning that it looks like.
Well, I think it's particularly important to think about, and again, I know the cost doing, you don't have to do a movie production on the one hand, but there are enough tools out to be able to do things that are graphic that people could actually understand.
Right.
This is what it's going to look like, but this is how we get there in a much more visual way than a narrative way. And I think that's going to be critically important too.
Yeah.
And we'll get there as we get further in design, right? Again, planning is just requirements, and we take those requirements through the interviews that we've done and sort of compiling those together. So we will have those. It'll just be a little later in the design process.
Great. Any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Wood.
So I just, since I'm always trying to summarize. So I'm wanting to make sure that I'm understanding what we're doing next and where BGS is moving next. So we have sufficient funds to get us down pretty far down that list. So what you got today is sufficient for you to move ahead with that. And then, or after whatever motion I guess we're going to have. And then before we do anything with 2 through 4, we're going to engage in this public process, but we're not doing the public process for phase 1.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Representative Emmons, did I see a hand?
So I just need some real clarification. I think what Teresa just mentioned. Where are we going next? We know we're doing a public process. I want to know what BGS is doing next. And I want to know what my committee and Senator Ingalls' committee is going to be seeing this coming session. Are we going to be seeing schematic designs for scenario 1, regardless of the public input? That's what I want to know.
Well, also, Alice, just to chime in on that, right? Representative, we will need, in order to go to schematic design, we need approval from someone to say it's okay to keep going. So that's kind of critical to the timeline that you're talking about, Representative. And then the only other thing that I look to Joe to say, okay, we go back to Creighton Fresh Freeman, the architect. How long do they think it will take them, right, to develop that schematic design and be ready to report out to the committees? Right, because it's all a function of time. So I don't know how long schematic design is going to take from Creighton Fresh Freeman's perspective.
The report says 3.5 months.
Okay, so if we got approval today or soon, It sounds like we would be able to have something to present then during the session. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Joe?
Late session.
Late session, okay.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
and this, we weren't going to be taking any official action today, but now the question is,
Feels like we should.
should we,
Yeah.
in order to check that box that, you know, that we are
Yeah.
supporting?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess we do have certainly a quorum, right? Because John and I thought I saw the pro tem. You guys think, yeah, so, okay, so you would entertain a motion then?
Yes, I will. Okay. So just give us 1 second for a sheet,
Oh, a
of course.
Yeah.
Are you the clerk?
Oh,
Oh, the chair
I have, thought I had brought
Oh my
one from
gosh,
upstairs.
What a consolidation
So
of
we'll just,
authority.
1 second. Actually, I can,
I can go get the form. If you
Yeah.
want to use the agenda for the names. It's printed on my own.
great. Okay, well, while we're waiting for that, we can still take up the motion.
So I'd move to approve, want to make sure I call it what it's called in here. Scenario 1, to address accessibility and safety issues at the State House.
Great.
I'll second the motion.
Is there any further questions or discussion before I call the roll? Get the sheet. Great. Okay, so this will be just 1 second, 1 moment, and then we can. I'll call the roll.
Just ask a question, particularly of the Chairs of the Institutions Committee, based on what you both see coming down the road to us in terms of demands for capital. How does this project fit in that? And is it something that will have to be sacrificed as a result?
So right now, we have put together our 2-year budget because we do capital budgeting for 2 years. And it's for FY24 and FY25. We do have a capital bill budget adjustment process that we'll be going into come this session, so we can move money around. Our bonding capacity for each year right now is 54 million. So we have $108 million bonding capacity for 2 years. So that's what we're working under right now for FY24 and FY25. So if we put any money in our budget adjustment this coming session for this project, which we're going to need about 10 million or 9 million, 10 million, and the cost is going to go up because I can assure you when you start looking into ADA, there's going to be some other items that will now have to be included that we're not thinking of. So my hunch is we're going to be close to 10 or 11 million that we're going to have to find. As we proceed, we could find a few million in budget adjustment this year for FY25 is my hunch, but something else will have to be adjusted. Next, for FY26 and 27, which would be the session of 2025, where we start a new 2-year budget cycle, is going to be dependent on the Debt Affordability Committee and their recommendation for how much we can bond. And that's been kind of going down little by little every year. So I would assume we'd still be at about the $54 million per year bonding capacity. I don't know if that helps or confuses.
Thank you, Representative Evans. Do you have a follow-up? Or you-
Well, I think it obviously helps, but based on what you're seeing and looking forward right now in terms of capital needs, is there something that, based on adding this project, that you think is a high likelihood we will need to drop? And if so, what might it be?
It's hard to say, but Senator Ingalls?
I think it's a question that's hard to answer. I mean, we've got a lot of unknowns coming as far as what the bill is going to be due what the both of our committees are going to be tasked with as far as trying to fix all the damage that's been done. We don't know any of the figures, only rough figures as far as what's going to get FEMA's going to pay for, what the insurance company is going to pay for, and it's a really hard answer to even assume anything until you get something concrete to try to move forward. I think Representative Chair Emmons' analysis as far as how the capital bill is going to work and what we've seen in historical dollars coming forward. I mean, we're trying to move it more towards a cash fund part of it too. And as we do that, maybe our bonding capacity will go up as we see. But I think you have to stay with what the historical nature of what the bill's doing, and assume the lower amount of numbers and to go from there. But there's just too many unknowns to reach out and pluck some of those figures out of the air, I believe.
And we
Well, it's
also,
fair to say that as you go forward and you look at what the capital demands are going to be, there will be a process of prioritization in which you decide what's the most important thing to do and what's the least important thing to do. And somewhere there'll be a cutoff after you run out of bonding capability. Will that be true with this project in terms of at some point you decide, hey, we don't have the bonding capacity available as much as we may want to do this, and then stop it?
Well, I think the quick number is on the flooding, just on the buildings that are inside of the State House, is $500 million. And I think that you can probably say that 20% of that $500 million is going to be somewhat have to be paid for as far as for the cost of what our part's going to be. There's $100 million of monies. And again, and I apologize to the committee. I'm assuming a lot. I'm throwing very, very numbers out there that can't be supported, but I just doing simple math. So we're looking at $100 million minimum, I believe, as far as just to get our buildings right, as far as what the historic flooding is done. So, Senator Brock, I think that you're right with your line of questioning that we need to know at some point in time what type of monies that we have. But I also believe this. I believe that to move forward on this project where we already have the monies set aside through the ARPA funds, doesn't hurt us to get to the next level and see where we can go. I think it's smart to move ahead. There's certainly interest as far as doing something with the State House for a lot of different reasons, and one of them being safety of the public, accessibility of the public, and safety of the members that are there. So, but yeah, I think I can be comfortable putting it out there. I haven't said much. I can be comfortable moving to phase one. We have the funds available to do that. It makes the most sense to us. But if we get to the end of it and then we don't have the monies, well, then we just have to figure out what we're going to do.
Thank you, Senator. Oh, go ahead.
Brock, what we do, we have the beauty of a 2-year capital bill, which gives us more flexibility. And we've been able to fund the projects that have needed to be funded in our priority projects or other projects that may not be as high priority. We've been able to fund those within a 2-year capital budget because there is flexibility there. So in terms of saying we get to a certain level and cut off projects, we really don't look at it that way. And we work to not operate that way. We may say, well, what is the cash flow? What's the flow of when the project actually can go to construction? And so we may put in a little bit of money at the beginning, knowing that we've got in a year or two, a big amount coming in. So that's how we budget it.
All right. And just to remind everyone, our role here is to provide direction for the committees, right, to help keep this conversation going. So I know that there will be a robust conversation and both the Senate and the House committees on next steps. So we have a motion out and we're in discussion. Do you go ahead?
I just want to ask the chairs of the committee by going down this road and committing to schematic design and design development, and we have the funds to do that. Is there any risk should in the next year or two there's no money to proceed forward, but we're at a point where when the money becomes available, then we can move forward with the project, provided public and we all get together and our colleagues get together and say, yes, move ahead with this. Are we at risk of, well, let me rephrase that. Is this, in your opinion, is this spending for this piece of this redevelopment a good investment?
I believe it is. The State House is where the seat of state government is, and it's where our Vermonters access their state government, and it has to be accessible.
I also believe that there's been decisions made before we've gotten to this point that we want to, there's an appetite to investigate further about what, what we could do with the State House. I think we're being prudent with the people's monies as far as moving this forward. I don't know about what those dollars would have been used for otherwise. I surely we could find a place for them. But I think that there's been a process that's gone on for 2 years to get to this point of making a vote, and I'm comfortable with where we are right now.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion before I call the roll? Seeing none, Senator Baruth, Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Hashim,
Yes.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Representative James,
Yes.
Representative Shaw,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
Senator Ingalls,
Yes.
Representative Emmons,
Yes,
and I am a yes, so the motion carries.
Senator Baruch is on.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, you just appeared out of nowhere. Hello.
I am confused. I thought today was a no vote day.
So we've had several verbal sort of consensus on moving forward. And so it became clear that we needed to have a formal vote to confirm what we have been approving all along.
Okay,
So
I have no idea what the motion was.
Yep, I did not see you jump on since I was keeping the roll. So the motion that was made by Representative Wood to approve moving forward with phase 1, which is what we've been talking about in the previous meetings, that covers the ADA and the west side. Yes.
I am a yes.
Great, thank you. All right, so motion carries. So members, what we will do for next steps is to, I'll pull together a plan for public engagement and send it out to you all for any feedback that you have. And then we'll present that to all members about what that looks like in coordination with the Friends of the State House and others, and have the timeline and all of that. So keep an eye out on your emails for that. And then we'll make sure to coordinate with both Representative Emmons and Ingalls on the next steps as well. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up?